For grassroots activists, community builders, punk rock farmers, DIY makers, and musicians. I'm Laura Jones, and tonight we have a special simulcast. And here to tell us more about it is Kathy Beely, League of Women Voters of Utah president and the Salt Lake Tribune Readers Utah of the Year. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much. Laura Jones of Radioactive will be moderating tonight. And good evening to the rest of you, and welcome to the annual legislative preview from the League of Women Voters of Utah and the American Association of University Women. We owe a debt of thanks to both Cynthia Phillips, our Legislative Action Director, and AAUW's Terry Jewell for putting this together. Tonight, we welcome 4 of our intrepid legislators, Senator Luz Escamilla, Representative Melissa Ballard, Representative Angela Romero, and Representative Ray Ward. Hopefully, they are all coming on board soon. Laura Jones will be moderating, and I'm sure you'll have questions as we go along. Please put your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll be looking at them during the program. So now here's Laura Jones. Thanks, Laura.
Hey, thank you, Kathy, Utah of the Year. Gotta say that as much as I can. Thanks, everybody. For those of us listening on the radio, if you want to be able to submit questions, go to the show post at krcl.org and join the session. You got to register, and then it's going to send you the link. All right, we only have the Democrats joining us first, so we're going to get started. And as our other lawmakers join, we will put them into the conversation. So I'm hoping, Senator Escamilla, Representative Romero, what we're going to do is have you both for a couple of minutes remind folks about your district, where it is geographically, demographically, a little bit of your legislative history, and then we'll go from there. So let's go with the House first. Representative Romero.
Thank you, Laura, and it's nice to be here today. So I represent House District 25, which is the west side of Salt Lake City and West Valley. And I also serve as the minority leader of the House Democrats, as well as the president of the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators. I've been elected now for 12 years, and I look forward to a robust conversation.
Wonderful. How long have you been again? When did you first get elected, Representative Romero?
I got elected in 2012, so my first session was 2013.
All right, let's go with our fellow representative, Melissa Garf Ballard from District 20, a Republican. Can you share with us your district geographically, demographically, and your history in the legislature, Representative Garf Ballard?
Yes, I've been in since 2018, and my area is Woods Cross, North Salt Lake, and Bountiful in Utah, which is just north of Salt Lake City. So we have a great variety of Republican and Democrats in my area. More Republican, but it's definitely been a moderate area for as long, for many decades. And so for me, I think it's a great place to be, to have a lot of good conversation and variety of opinions that come forward. So I love being a legislator and be able to work and support the issues that are important to my constituents.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we also have joining us Representative Ray Ward. Representative Ward, please share with our listeners and our Zoomers the district geographically, demographically, a little bit of your legislative history.
Sure. And I'm so sorry. My camera seems to say that it will not work. So I'll work on that here during the next little bit.
No worries.
My district is Bountiful and West Bountiful. So the south end of Davis County, just right next to Melissa Ballard's district. I would say it's a very solid Republican district. It tends to be a district that does not want to burn the world down, but would prefer that the world still function. So maybe a little bit more of a traditional Republican district.
Okay. And when were you first elected?
2015.
All right. Now we're going to go to the Senate. Luz Escamilla. Senator Escamilla, you need to tell us all the same things.
Well, thank you so much, Laura, and thank you everyone for this opportunity. My first panel of the year for legislative session 2025. So I'm excited. My name is Luz Escamilla. I'm a state senator represented Senate District 10, and I've been elected for 16 years. This is my 17th session. Elected in 2008, so it's been a minute now, but excited to continue to work. And I've seen so much of the cycles of the Utah State Legislature, and it has provided me with some opportunities to understand history. I think the historical context of what happens, and it's interesting when you see some turnovers, how things repeat. History repeats itself for sure. My district is the most diverse district in the Senate, and also the one with the lowest income based on earned income tax returns. So a lot of working poor families, and so many, you'll see that a lot of my focus is obviously on families and working poor families, and ways that we can support so they can continue to be great part of our strengthening of our economy.
And geographically, what do you
Oh
take
yeah,
in?
sorry. So Senate District 10 is the best part of the whole state of Utah. I'm a little bit biased. Northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City, so everything west of I-15, Fair Park, Rose Park, Jordan Meadows, Airport, Salt Lake International Airport, and then about 60% of West Valley City and half of Magna City.
All right. So quite a wide swath.
Yes.
All right, folks. You're listening to a legislative preview presented by the League of Women Voters of Utah and the American Association of University Women of Utah. And the reason I say this, even though we're all on a Zoom, is we are broadcasting live on KRCL 90.9 FM. So, folks, think about your questions. You can put them in the Q&A, and we'll be vetting those. But right now, I want to start again. Representative Romero, we're going to go with you. And if you would just start us off by talking about your hopes, fears, dreams, the 2025 legislative session, maybe some of your top priorities.
Well, I have my personal top priorities and I have our caucus top priorities. And I think the top priorities for my caucus is looking at housing and how do we address and with a heart when it comes to people experiencing homelessness. We also want to protect higher education and our public schools. And we also have concerns with the direction the state is going when it comes to energy. But my personal priorities are always focused around sexual assault and domestic violence, and in particular, a focus on murdered and missing Indigenous relatives, reauthorizing that, but also looking at best practices when it comes to sexual assault.
All right. Those are the priorities or the issues on the mind of Representative Angela Romero. Representative Melissa Garf-Ballard, the same for you.
Yes, I'm actually excited for the work that I've been doing in corrections to help prepare for those who have been incarcerated to be ready to be our neighbors in our community, to be contributing citizens. And so I'm on the appropriations and standing committee for that, and have some great work that I'm doing in preparation for that. As a caucus, we're so excited for the Olympics to come in 2034. And so with that, there's a lot of preparation to be had with transportation. If our transportation is flowing and fluid, we have a fluid economy. We always are working on safe communities, of what's happening to keep our schools safe in particular, and our neighborhoods, and fighting the drug and sex trafficking that is going on in our country, of what we can do to keep our citizens safe. There's always an emphasis that I have and that my colleagues have in accountable government. How can we be more effective with your tax dollars? I know that there will be conversations about reducing taxes. And this year we've done it substantially for the last 4 years in a row, so that our citizens can keep more of their money. But for me, I really want to make sure that we are planning for the future for our state employees, and to have the role of government really be accountable, including the work that we've done. And for homelessness, we have really helped to have quite a lot of money that we've put into our communities that the legislature has designated to help improve the number of housing units available, which will ultimately make a difference. I have 6 kids and 5 are newly married, and affordability is a big issue on the minds of many Utahns and families. And so there's a lot to be done, but I am excited and looking forward to this next session.
Wonderful. Representative Ward, what are your priorities or what are you watching out for?
Priority that I'll be working on this year and really I think for some time is housing affordability. I feel like the things that the legislature has done so far are unlikely to make housing more affordable. And I feel like it's odd, but housing affordability is not the same thing as affordable housing at all. You're just putting the words in opposite order. I think when you say affordable housing, you mean the government takes somebody's money and uses that money to subsidize some kind of project, and with that subsidy creates a set of housing that people who are below some income level are able to rent or get into for below market value. And that does benefit those individuals, but I don't think that lowers the average cost of housing at all. Not one bit. To me, the laws of supply and demand still hold. And I think our costs are very high because we have forbidden smaller units to be built. And in that sentence, the word "we" means individual cities who find it not to their advantage to build more residential in residential areas. They say that we've already got residences here and we don't want any more. And in commercial areas, they say we can't put any housing in the commercial areas because commercial pays us revenue and taxes, which we need. And so we will forbid any housing to be built there. And that's kind of got us where we are. And I don't think there's any reason to think it's going to get any better unless we allow more housing to be built and we allow smaller housing on smaller lots to be built. So I'll be working on that. I have a bill that will make it much easier for an adoptee from a closed adoption when they become an adult to go get their original birth certificate. Right now, they have to go before a judge and get a lawyer and plead their case. And then we give them their birth certificate, which is in fact their own medical record of their medical history. It belongs to them. And so what the process should be is that if they ask for it, we give it to them. And on energy, which I do think is a big issue and an important issue, I guess a piece that I would like to bite off that's a small piece is I feel like people ought to be able, in Europe, in Germany, you can go into the equivalent of a Best Buy and you can buy a solar panel there and you can bring it home and you can plug it in. And you just plug it in your wall and it just makes solar energy and it puts it right in your own house and reduces your electricity bill. But in the United States, we can't do that. Yet those kind of products are not available. And so I'd like to get the barriers out of the way so that we could just go do that and have a little bit of solar energy in our own house.
I like that. All right. Senator Luz Escamilla, how
Um,
about you?
It's certainly a very, I think, an exciting year, and at the same time, there's going to be a lot of changes. We have a very large class of freshman legislators coming in, so that certainly brings some changes in the dynamic, and also a new administration in the White House. So as Senate Democrats, I can say as a leader of my caucus that one of the things we want to be is be just very conscious of the fact that with new changes within even the federal administration, we want to make sure our constituents feel that they have representation in the state legislature and to protect the separations of branches of government. That is critical and important to us. Be very vigilant of the separation specifically with the judicial branch in the state of Utah and making sure there's no, that they can practice the way they need to and how it is in our Constitution, in place, and no retaliation there after certain decisions. We've seen there are some concerns and some maybe interest on changing some of those pieces. We are focusing with our colleagues, obviously, in the House, as Minority Leader Romero explained. Housing is critical. The way we approach the issue of homelessness, that continues to be certainly especially for us in Salt Lake City, a priority, and we want to continue to work on that. Individually, I'm Most of my work has been on social services. I get to work also with Representative Ward on issues of medical cannabis. And that's something we've done for many years. And we continue to do that as a group of legislators that works collectively in a bipartisan effort. I get also to work with the good Representative Melissa Ballard on the issue of individuals that are incarcerated as they're coming back to our communities, and reintegration of those individuals and making sure they're healthy as they're coming back. But I'll be focusing on childcare, Laura. That's my number one priority. Is we have a childcare crisis in Utah. It impacts our ability to continue to be prosperous as a community and as a state when we're putting parents in a really difficult situation with the lack of access to affordable, high-quality childcare. So we're bringing different solutions to the toolbox, and it's an ongoing conversation. The other one is food security. Food security, it's a problem, especially for children. I know there's multiple efforts to address this, and my bill is basically a universal way of saying every child in a public school, K to 12, should have access to free, not reduced, but free access to breakfast and lunch. Everyone, if they can afford it, they should opt out and or pay or whatever the case is. But if everyone walks in knowing that they will have breakfast and lunch available as part of their education, that's a very obviously a big dream of mine to have that in place. But we need to start those conversations. Other states have done it. I don't see why Utah is not making sure their kiddos are taken care of when it comes to access to food.
All right. I want to talk access to voting, voting reforms that may be on your radar that you've been hearing about swirling for the People's House in January 21st is when the session starts, folks. But in particular, Utahns love vote by mail. Federally, vote by mail is not getting a good rap, I feel like. And so I'm concerned about what may happen this session, especially if folks want to go back to same day, you got to show up. Do we even have the money for that? The machines for that? So, Senator Escamilla, access to voting, voting reforms.
Right. I think you probably read some of the quotes by Minority Leader Romero and myself. We both are part of the audit subcommittee, and that audit came out, and a lot of conversations happened with the Speaker, President of the Senate, and majority minority leaders. So we know it's something that's being discussed, and 100% behind vote by mail. And I actually talked about when I ran the first time in 2008, we didn't have the all-state vote by mail, 30% voting participation. This last time, we're now in the 80s in terms of voting participation, totally changing the way we have engagement, civic participation, and truly having people feel like they're part of their government. So I've been quoted multiple times, this is not a vote by mail problem, this is an implementation issue. And those through the audit, they were issues that were brought up, and there should be consequences. And those are, within the, our clerks, we need to provide them with the tools and, be very clear on what the expectations are and work with our Lieutenant Governor's office and elections office to make that happen. So we will be protecting vote by mail. I can tell you that. We think it's the best way of promoting civic engagement, and Democrats will be standing strong behind vote by mail.
All right. Thank you so much. And I apologize, Representative Garth Ballard. I forgot to ask you your priorities. So if you'd like to share those, go ahead. And
Okay,
then voting after that.
Yes, you did ask me, and I did share some things regarding reentry and transportation and preparing for the Olympics. So you got
All
me.
right.
You did it.
I had a note that said maybe I forgot. So let's do vote for you. Go ahead.
Yes, I recall the many times as a young mom that I was in the car driving past the voting station thinking, I am not going to go stand in that line for 3 hours with all my kids that are in my car, and I have a carpool I have to meet. And what excitement it was for me with all that I have been juggling for so many decades, that I get my ballot in the mail and I get to vote. We are one of 8 states in the country that receive our ballot by mail. Some of my colleagues have some proposals to return the ballot a different way. I love putting mine in the mail. Many of my colleagues want, I know that there will be some legislation that says you have to turn in your ballot in person and show your ID. Well, that's actually a different discussion because if it's a drive-by, I am all for it. I don't want to get out of my car. I have places to go, things to do. So I would love to know if that's an option. And then also, I have the question about valid IDs. I know how easy it is to get fake IDs. I know how easy it is to borrow family members because that's where some of um, the challenge of somebody signing for a parent or a sibling or somebody in the family that they might look like of taking their ID and turning in their voter thing anyway. I do want to say when I was last at the Salt Lake City airport, they have a big QR code and that says you can have your digital driver's license right here. So I was excited. I downloaded it, and Get Mobile ID is the name of the app. And my driver's license, my valid with a star driver's license, is now the only one I can have on my phone. I can't have multiple IDs on my phone. And the best thing is when you look at my ID, you don't even know how much I weigh. I don't have to tell you where I live. I can just say, this is me, and it's a valid thing. So if I had my choice, I would say, let's do it digitally. So it's a quick scan. But I will have to see what the legislation ends up looking like. I know that the statistics that I've seen from some of the Republican colleagues, they're looking at national statistics, and we just do things differently in Utah. Some of the comment was there was 1,000 ballots down in southern Utah that weren't counted because they turned them in and the post office had to send it to Vegas and then back. Well, I turned my ballot in 3 weeks early. If you don't want to have to worry about your ballot getting in on time, don't wait till the last day to turn in your vote. So I think it'll be a really interesting discussion because there's many who want you to go stand in a line with your ID, and we'll see if I'm going to be voting for the details. I always wait for the details
The
because
details. That's what we all wait for, right?
that's what we all wait for. But I do appreciate the incredible amount of changes that our legislature has made in the last 6-7 years of audits, both at a local level, at a state level, that are now required, standards that we have, high standards that we expect our counties to have, and the quick amount of way that we have been able to see which counties have not been able to meet those standards. So I think implementation, Senator Escamilla is right. It is how it is implemented. And I really appreciate that we have put so much effort into validating the process. And so we'll see where the legislation ends up that we end up voting on.
So I think is it Norm Thurston out of Utah County? Am I getting that name right? He's got a bill that I think he's proposing that would you have to get your ballot in, make sure it's returned, not just postmarked, but returned by the date. So it puts the onus
He's
on.
got one, Representative Rex Ship has one, Representative Jeff Burton has one. So we'll have to see which ones really end up, how the cream rises and which ones have the most support and are really practical, I think is where it's going to end up. So I would recommend for anyone listening to really reach out at not right now because we don't have the details in front of us, but as these bills come forward, I know I'm going to be putting out a poll and many other legislators may be as well, but you need to make sure you see what the writing is on the legislation before you just say, here's what I want, because we'll have to see where it ends up. But I would let your legislator know what's important to you in being able to vote and making sure that your vote counts.
Representative Ward and then Representative Romero.
So I guess in as much as this meeting is supposed to be a preview, I get,
I hear you got a bill.
I'll have that bill. That's a different bill. But if we were just guessing, which of the bills do I think will have the support of leadership? I don't know how the details will go, so I agree with Representative Ballard. I think that the bill that would, I don't think there will be a concerted push to take away vote by mail with the ballots being mailed out. I am just guessing that the bill will say the ballots are still mailed out, but that the sponsors running the bill will say, we don't think that just looking at a signature is an accurate enough way to determine if that is a valid vote or not. And so they will say that it needs to have some other form of ID to be counted, and that could be just bringing it back in person, showing your ID, I think there will maybe be some exception for people who say I can't come to the other place. So I don't know if there'll be some other pathway to include an ID with it when you mail it back. But those are the details that I think it will circle around. Another bill that I have that I think would be a good change to our system right now in all 49 other states, you can run for office in a primary election by either many states, you just go file. You say, I want to run in the Republican primary. I'm a Republican. I want to run. You just file, pay the fee, and run. About half of other states, you have to gather some signatures. But the number of signatures that you have to gather in other states is 1/10 as many as we require here in Utah. It's not close. It really is 90% less. So I'm content that with two pathways to the ballot where you can run if you think that you best appeal to the delegates in your party. You can run that way without gathering any signatures at all through convention. But to me, you also ought to be able to run if you think that you can just appeal to the primary voters in your district without it breaking the bank. If that's who you say, this is who I match up with. And so my bill would just lower the signature thresholds by about 90%. I don't know that I have I mean, certainly there'll be opposition to that, but that's my suggestion and that's my bill.
Well, let's do that, and then let's have ranked choice voting to weed that down fast. Representative.
Well, that's not going to happen, I don't think, but I'm not saying it's a bad idea.
Hot topic right there.
That was a hot potato I threw in there. Representative. Access to voting.
My concern to access to voting, and Senator Escamilla and I serve on the Legislative Audit Committee. As she mentioned, I'm not going to repeat what her and the good representative pointed out. It was more of implementation and holding certain counties accountable. But my concern with the suggestion of showing your photo ID is we have to think about all of Utah and think about people's age as well. Like my dad doesn't have his Social Security card. We were talking about this and he's like, oh my gosh, I have to find that. And just these different forms of ID and just looking at disenfranchised groups, like we're looking at people who live on the reservation or people who live long distance from a ballot box. And so I think instead of putting hurdles for people, we should make voting easy and accessible. And I think we've done that as a state, and we just have to tweak some stuff internally. And in our audit committee, Senator Vickers even pointed out that we've increased the number of people voting, and that actually benefits Republicans in Utah by vote by mail. And so I would hate for us to strip away those rights from people just because some people are looking at a small margin instead of looking at what the real issue is. And this is not really an issue here in Utah, as the good representative said, and we might have a different view on that. This is a national movement. And for me, I feel like it's a way to suppress votes. And because sometimes people don't like the vote outcome. I didn't like the vote outcome this election cycle when it came to the president of the United States, but you know what? He won. And so that's the beauty of this country, is giving people those options. And so if we can give people the option to vote and make sure that it's accessible to everyone, not just a particular group of people, then we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, we had a question submitted about what about the folks that don't have ID or can't get to the ballot drop-off locations? And just like you said, that type of requiring folks to show up with an ID and turn it in, that's going to really hurt in rural districts, which are by and large lean Republican, down in San Juan County, where folks have to go with the roads to another state and then come back to get to where they can drop it off. I mean, it doesn't seem like the right answer yet. So voting, let's talk about government transparency. How do you plan to navigate this session? All of you, you've got 2 Democrats, we've got 2 Republicans. So if the Democrats navigating a supermajority, the Republicans making sure you listen to all your constituents and don't have to pass a purity test. Representative Ray Ward, let's start with you.
I'm just have to listen to all my constituents. What do you mean? I don't.
Just how are you going to navigate the session? Like you said, you're a bit more moderate. And we are in a super majority state with Republicans, and they're not a monolith. You have to navigate the session too to get your priorities across with your colleagues.
Sure. Yes, politics is the art of the possible, right? I mean, I think in the Utah legislature, it does help you if you're friends to everyone. They may disagree with you strongly on a bill, But then as long as you're friends to them on the very next bill, they might be one of your big supporters that helps you get it through. So I think that dynamic has held for me, and I would work hard to be on good, friendly, personal terms with every single legislator, even though, you might have real disagreements about the policy. As far as reaching out to the folks in my district, I'll send out my email survey. I'll get 500 or 600 answers back if it's similar to other years, and that helps you make your best guess about what they want overall. It certainly occasionally paints you a picture that's really different from what you hear walking the halls up at the Capitol, but then that helps you keep your feet on the ground and know that, hey, that's what the people in my district want, so that's just what I'm going to do.
Okay, let's go to Senator Luz Escamilla and Representative Angela Romero, 1 and 2 here. Navigating as part of the minority, the Democrats. Senator.
Yes, it's always been the same, I guess, scenario for me in my 16 years and now entering my 17th year. So I've been in a minority of 5 Senate Democrats. We're now 6, but I've also been when we're 7. So not a big number, like everybody's laughing. We're such a small number, but mighty for sure. I think one of the things I appreciate about our legislature, and I do, because, and Representative Romero knows this as, a national leader that she is, and we get to participate in national conferences. All of us get to go to different groups. That in Utah, there is a sense of, we vote together close to 85% of the time as legislators. It means we work very closely to get to those bills. All of my bills, really, like, I would say 98% of my bills have a Republican in the House sponsoring my bills, because I know how to count votes. I know that, for a Democrat, it's going to take a different process to get us there. I think Representative Ward talking about friendship and building relationships of trust, it's critical within the legislature, and it takes time to do that. I also know it's longer for Democrats to get some of our policies, through the whole process, and we sometimes come back year after year, but it builds into this a sense of, more of that Utah way, right? I mean, where people still listen, and they, even if there is a disagreement, we can still work together on that process. So I will continue to do that, and we have some policies where there are some disagreements, but we will also speak up on our district. I mean, we do represent a large number of our state population here in the state, and we think they deserve a voice as well. So it's just, I think, continue to agree to disagree respectfully when it's needed, but at the same time, build on our relationships of trust. And I'm hoping, and I mean, Representative Ward and Representative Ballard, they're great people that we work with them all the time, but there may be other colleagues where there may be more differences, and their districts may look way different. But
Yeah.
I'll say this, former Majority Leader Senator Evan Vickers is one of my closest friends, and his district kind of look more different than mine. I mean, when you think about the state of Utah and the demographics that we represent, and we've actually sponsored bills, and there's only 2 bills in the last 16 years that had 2 senators sponsoring the bill as chief sponsors. And we did one with after George Floyd case on the choking bill. So, those things where you can work together and find those common ground, I think, are still very important. And we will continue to look for those opportunities in this next session.
And Representative Romero, as minority leader, like you said when we started, you have your personal priorities, you have your caucus priorities. How do you navigate?
I think they've all kind of mentioned, it's just treating people as people, but also listening to what someone has to say. It's so easy to tone someone out, or because you don't agree with them, and not listen to them. So for me, in many situations, it's having those conversations beforehand. Like today, I'm running the Family Restorative Act for our Indigenous populations, where we tried to run that a couple of years ago, a different representative, and it got stuck in the House. But I met with the new chair of Judiciary to talk about the bill and talk about why it was important. And I had the Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah there with me to have those conversations. And he's like, well, let me explain to you the concerns that were raised before, and they took it down. So it's having those conversations, because sometimes we might be saying the same thing, we're just using a different dialect in a sense. And sometimes you're just not going to agree. But for me to throw my colleagues under the bus, even if I don't agree with them, on social media, it doesn't really get me anywhere. I mean, everyone has their way of communicating, everyone has their way of doing things. But for me, I look at infrastructure and I look at structures and institutions, and they're not going to change overnight. And so how do you work and find commonality, but how do you also stand your ground? And I can talk about standing your ground when it comes to immigration, and I really don't support where we're going as a state, because immigration is really a state issue. And so I think it's important to have those honest policy conversations. And I'm lucky enough that me and the speaker and I, he came in a year after me, but we used to office next to each other. And so we have some really tough conversations, but we know when the other one needs a little more space. And then we come back and we have those conversations again. So I think it's important to know that you're going to disagree with people, and sometimes it's going to be heated. But how do you come back to have that same conversation? And maybe you don't change your mind, maybe you do, but you have to be open to the conversations. And a lot of times it's a little more difficult than people think. And I think I get emails sometimes where people just tell me off, and I'm closed off when someone sends me an email telling me I'm, calling me names. The conversation doesn't go anywhere. So that's how I look at when I talk to my colleagues about things that I don't agree with them on. I talk about the policy. I don't go after them as an individual.
All right. Thank you so much. And Representative Melissa Garf Ballard, talk to us about how you, maybe it's even changed over the years since you've been in there.
Well, I'll give you an example. My father, Robert Garf, was the Speaker of the House during the 80s. And when he was there, it was not a supermajority. He had to pass legislation with both sides coming to the table. So when I started in 2018, that's what I had seen so much during my life is and continued for many decades of my family, individual members, being friends with people from all walks of life. For me as a Republican, if you look at being on the far left or the far right and being right in the middle, I'm smack in the middle of the Republicans. I'm not extreme one way or another, but I love my colleagues wherever they sit. And so as a legislator, and I love that we have so many, by the way, so many Democrats who sit as chairs of our committees and of councils and commissions. And when there is something that it needs to be done for a task force, there's always that bipartisan that is representing both the House and the Senate. And I love that that's the culture that we have in Utah. And I've got great friendships in every aspect. With it being I think some of your question, with it being a supermajority, we just have more of each type of Republican. And so we still within our majority caucus have to compromise, and we have to understand what the different needs are. But I love being a Utahn, and I love the respect, at least that I have with my colleagues and the friendships. In fact, I'll be sitting right next to the Democrats on the House floor. So I'm really excited. I've already met a number of the new legislators both in the Republican and Democrat sides. And I love that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think it is different than many other states. But you will always have personalities that don't want to go across the aisle. But for me personally, I love being a floor sponsor or asking my Democrat colleagues, just like Representative Ward and I have both done things with Senator Escamilla, and I appreciate Representative Romero, because she's right. She has been great about standing up for things that are really important to her. And I appreciate so many of the things that she's done with date rape kits and other things. And so we definitely, in the end, we all want a better Utah. So how we get there is what the process is that we're working on.
But I also want to
Go
add
ahead.
that is like, it's not always going to be like rainbows and butterflies. We're going to have those tough conversations. So I don't want people to walk away thinking that we don't have those tough conversations, or that partisanship doesn't play a role. I mean, everyone knows I'm about as progressive as you get, but I also know when there's time to compromise, but I also know there's a time to say, no, I don't agree with you on this, and I'm going to stand up for what I believe in, and I'm going to stand up for many of the people that I represent. So I don't want people to walk away from this thinking that we're holding hands and singing songs all the time, because we're not. I
Yeah.
mean, that's not what we're here to do. We're here to address policy and look at infrastructure and look at how the state's going to run. But until we have a more balanced legislature, um, it's harder. But there are times where there is a bill where Democrats make a decision whether it passes or not.
Yeah. And I appreciate Representative Garth Ballard, your perspective there from your father's days in the state house, because yeah, there's a lot of folks that don't realize the supermajority used to go the other way. All right, we just have about 20 minutes left on the radio portion of this broadcast. So, folks, this is KRCL 90.9 FM, and you're listening to a legislative preview presented by the League of Women Voters of Utah and the American Association of University Women. We're talking with 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans tonight. If you would like to put a question to our panel, go to the show post at krcl.org. It's on the homepage. And then click the register button and you'll get the Zoom link to join the Zoom side of this. We're going to drop out at 7 and keep going on the Zoom with Q&A, and that's where I'd like to switch now. We've got some great questions coming in. And I want to go with this one from Cassidy first. Says, I hope this is appropriate to ask here. I am a social work student and would love to get more involved in my area and at the macro area in general. I am in District 10. Can anyone speak on this, how a younger college student can get involved, understand the language of bills, etc.? Are there committees I can get involved with, such as involvement with incarcerated individuals or some way I can get engaged? I hope this is appropriate, totally appropriate. It's the People's House starting, 365, 24/7, but January 21st, the session starts. I don't know if anybody is passionate, wants to go first, so I'm just going to call on Representative Garth Ballard.
You know, I love that she's wanting to be involved. And I remember when I first ran for this position, my fear was, I don't know if I'm articulate in these issues. So guess what? You go to work. You show up, you listen to committees, you put your foot forward, you ask questions, you put yourself in the circumstances where you can hear and learn what the policy is and what's going on. And fortunately, today we have everything online. So le.utah.gov. You can watch individual committees of the topics that you're interested in. You can also participate. There is public comment in our standing committees when we're discussing bills that you can be a participant either in person to give your perspective or to be on the Zoom. You can raise your hand. So I think that's an important part of our process. And I would just say, ask around, be involved, put your foot forward, ask questions and of your own legislator. And with the work that I've done with incarcerated individuals, we need you. We need you to be qualified. We need you to be willing to take these hard circumstances. I'm really excited for all the changes that we've been making in corrections, and I think that'll make a big difference. But we need you, and so you help to make our community better when you are willing to be invested in helping those that really need the counseling and work. So thank you for being willing to step forward.
Well, Senator Luz Escamilla, District 10, that's you.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you for that. And yes, we need everyone. And I'll start with a program we do have in the Utah State Legislature, which is our very robust internship program for college, university. I mean, any higher education institution in the state of Utah gets to participate and can be an intern. It doesn't matter what you're studying, what the degree that you're registered in the college or university, you can apply for the internship program, and they literally become the assistants of every legislator. Our interns are 24/7. I mean, every day during the session. It's I think it's 8 credits that they get out of this program. So it is a very robust program. So that's like a very institutionalized program, and they get a stipend. It's an amazing program, and they apply every year. So I encourage students, if they're interested, to learn and really be in the front lines of the legislature to do this internship. The other piece is, and the good representative mentioned, we have a great website, very interactive, You can get notifications on your phone when a committee, if you're following a bill, if you want to get information on specific committees, they notify you with 24 hours because that's what the law says. So we can, the agendas will be public 24 hours before the committee hearing, and you can follow a bill or a committee that way. Other ways to do it, we have a lot of nonprofit and advocacy organizations that engage with the legislature during session. And you can engage with them to start working in specific areas. So let's say you are interested in children's issues, there's Voices for Utah Children as an example. Or there's for individuals that are incarcerated, there's UPAN. So I mean, you have all these organizations that are already doing some advocacy that is easier sometimes to start your advocacy education. Representative Romero and myself, we do advocacy 101 trainings right before session for multiple organizations of advocacy. So that's another way. And then get to know your own legislators. And usually that happens before session, like during interim. I always invite people to call your legislator, send a text and say, I'm interested in chatting with you. It may be a Zoom meeting or a meeting in person. Every legislator that I know is interested in hearing from their constituents. So that's another way of engaging and saying, these are my priorities as your constituent, and I want I want you to hear me and tell me more about where you stand on these issues.
All right. Thank you, Senator. I'm going to move to another question. I'm going to go 2 lawmakers and then another question for 2 lawmakers so we can get a few more in. So Representative Romero and Representative Ward, there was an article recently by Brigham Tomko in the Deseret News about the national battles coming to Utah. Those 3 issues being mail-in voting. We already talked about that. Higher ed funding and immigration. I'd like to tackle those 2 with each of you. Higher ed is kind of shaking its boots after the anti-DEI legislation passed last session and being asked to cut or prepare budgets that are cut by X amount. And then also on the immigration front, the Utah Compact many years ago, in which I was involved in helping to write, the Utah way was to have rational conversations, but we know with the new administration coming into the Oval Office that safety crackdowns and the immigration issues are hitting Utah as well. Representative Romero, which one would you like to tackle first?
Well, I'll tackle the immigration because I've had conversations with a lot of my colleagues, and I wanted to, and I said this to one of the newspaper, I would love for the governor or some of my colleagues to take a day and walk in my shoes or walk in Senator Escamilla's shoes, or I represent the most diverse district in the House, and 50% of my districts is Latino. And I have a lot of mixed status families, and I'd love for my colleagues to just live and see the world through our eyes and see the hate that's come towards us, that's been hurled towards us because of the incoming president and the Trump administration and what I view as his rhetoric. I'd love for them to kind of see the world through our eyes, because there are people out there who are not respectful, like my colleagues that are here on the call with it, on the Zoom meeting with us and the panel. And we get told to go home, and I like to tell people, my dad's Shoshone Bannock. We've lived here for over 12,000 years, and my mom's side is New Mexican, and we've been here since the 1600s, and the border crossed me. But when rhetoric's thrown out there, when people are saying things about a particular group, people don't care whether I've been here more generations and my family's been here longer than theirs. They just see me as the other. And so I think we have to be really careful when we're talking about immigration, because when I look at the people building the building from my office right now, I look at the people cleaning this building here. We depend on people, and we have to think about the economic factors as well, and also realize that this is a congressional issue that has to be addressed at a congressional level. And it's really not our role as the state legislature to do some things. And I also want to talk about the fentanyl crisis, because that's always tied into immigration. When you look at who's arrested and who is the purchasers of fentanyl, it is American citizens. And so I think it's very important that when we have these conversations, we're looking at all sides of it and not just criminalizing a community.
Are you hearing anything from public educators, especially at the higher ed level, about their concerns with the next session? Representative Romero, and then we'll go to Representative.
I think a lot of my colleagues do. I mean, a lot I've heard from different people. I've heard from students. I was fortunate enough. I'm a first generation college student. I went straight to a university. I was privileged enough to have the Center for Ethnic Student Affairs. I don't think if that center wouldn't exist, I would have never met Senator Escamilla at the time. And I don't know if I would have made it through college because I had a support system there. There were student organizations that understood who I was. So I have that concern when it comes to students. And we've seen this happen after the Supreme Court case on affirmative action and student enrollment in even Harvard University when we're talking about Black students, or MIT, and we're talking about students of color in general. And so my concern is faculty feeling like, oh, can I say something? Can I do something? Or is my job going to be cut because I'm in the humanities? The speaker and the speaker in particular has used the audit that we had recently when it comes to private universities versus public universities. But what that audit didn't really look at is the cost of these private universities, and are they accredited, and how much are people in debt after they go to some of these private universities that they could do online. So I'm not saying that our public universities don't need to make some changes. And we've always been, a transit university, especially the University of Utah and others. And so my concern is that although we're saying that this is, we want to cut 10%, this is also a national movement. A lot of this that's going on about higher education, immigration, voting is being pushed through a national agenda through conservative organizations because, quote unquote, our schools are woke. So I have real issues like that about that, because if I hadn't taken the classes I did, and it took me 8 years to graduate, and I had a baby in that cycle, I don't think I would be the person here today. I don't think I would be an elected official because of the classes I was exposed to that I chose to take, that I chose to pay for. And so I think what we're really doing is we're trying to take that choice away from individuals, and we're trying to say it's about the economy and it's about a need. Well, I think we can still expand nursing programs, engineering programs without taking away those the liberal arts and some of the other classes that are offered and courses that are offered at a university that individuals here don't understand because maybe they didn't go to university like I did, or they didn't do the traditional route that I did. So don't take away my right or other people's right or their academic freedom because you don't agree with it. So
Thank
that's
you,
what it
Representative
is. I think
Romero.
it's an attack on academic freedom. I don't think it's about the budget.
Representative Ray Ward, Republican from District 19. Why don't we go with higher education and then immigration since we're on that subject?
I think the way that we could say the 10% cuts that have been talked about are going to be framed and are going to be approached is to say to the universities, there is going to be a 10% cut unless you make some changes. And if you make some changes, then that money will still be available to you. You'll figure out over the next 2 or 3 years if you have made changes that meet the requirements. But the changes, when you say, well, okay, well, what changes are you going to put on them and cut their money unless they do those changes, right? That would be the central question that you would next ask. And the way that that's going to be framed is just according to the mission statement that already exists in law for each of the institutions, right? So we have some institutions that are technical colleges. We have other universities that are not technical colleges, but each of those already has a statutory direction about what their mission is. And so the changes will be to try and get them to hew more closely to that stated mission. So I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's helpful or if you still like that idea or absolutely hate the idea, but that is the way it is going to be presented and framed. So I don't even know what to expect with respect to legislation that specifically relates to immigration. I just don't. I don't know what all 104 legislators can bring bills, and I'm sure there'll be some, but I don't know what to expect in that respect. I guess I did want to just say one word about the fentanyl crisis that we're having, and I get right now it's fentanyl, and we could say the opioid crisis. A point that is just super important to me this session and for many years and for, I guess, the foreseeable future is, although it is true that most of the opioid deaths that are occurring right now are from fentanyl, and much of that is purchased illegally on the street, and it's cheaper than it has ever been because it's much easier to cheaper to manufacture than heroin used to be. It is still also true that almost all of those folks who die from a fentanyl overdose got started with their addiction to narcotics from prescriptions that came from a prescriber. And to me, I really feel like the medical establishment, and I feel like the medical government establishment, and by which I mean first and foremost the CDC, are doing things that are not helpful and that are very counterproductive. In particular, the CDC's guidelines on opioids still consist of 80 pages to explain how you should use opioids equitably, and how you should be very caring about patients as you give them opioids, and how you should almost never take them off opioids, and how even when they talk about using medication-assisted treatment, they cannot bring themselves to point out the basic fact that medication-assisted treatment, although it does make many people more stable, is still just giving them opioids. And to me, that for all those things, I feel like is saying, well, I'm going to give you a medicine that will make your cancer better for 2 months, and after that, it will in fact make your cancer worse. And now I'm going to describe how to give that medicine to anyone. So I just really wish that there'd be more focus from prescribers who write those prescriptions, but also from our governmental entities to say the thing that needs to be said, which is chronic opioids do not make chronic pain any better. There's never been one study that show it. The few studies we have show it makes it worse. And yet our governmental entities cannot bring themselves to say that out loud. So that's my own little high horse, but that's what I hope to focus on for as long as it takes.
Well, now this question, I'm guessing all four of you are going to want a piece of it, though. I'm going to mix up Great Salt Lake. I'm going to mix up taxes. I'm going to mix up Utah Inland Port Authority with a question from Katie that says, the Salt Lake Mosquito Abatement District has raised property taxes on area residents and businesses for the second time in 4 years. Their increasing costs are directly related to inland port development in the Northwest Quadrant, leading to greater need for services in the city. Utah Inland Port Authority is taking 75% of the tax differential in these port areas for 25 years, while increasing demand for this and other local services. All right, folks, do you think the Utah Inland Port Authority statute should be amended to allow municipalities the ability to recoup the costs of these increased service needs? And would any of you introduce or support such a bill? Representative Garf Ballard, you're first.
Oh, and I was like so excited. Sorry, I got so excited because I am in the mosquito abatement district.
All right, you go first, Senator
Let
Escamilla.
me maybe put some perspective into this because I saw the story that was on, I think, the Salt Lake Tribune. So I mean, reporting is very important. Responsible reporting. I'll leave it at that. So here's part of the problem in this conversation. One, the mosquito abatement increases in specifically Salt Lake Mosquito Abatement District. It also has to do with climate change. I mean, we need to talk about, there's so many factors into this. In our population growth happening mostly on the west side, it's also an issue. So let me say, in terms of the inland port, and we discussed this when both Representative Romero and myself opposed the inland port as they were coming to our district, and for many, many reasons. Mosquito abatement actually was probably one of the lowest in the ranking of problems that we were that we were describing for the inland port. But what we did say about mosquito abatement, period, the state prison is probably a bigger problem, actually. The state prison is a bigger problem when it comes because we have all these new people living in that area and we are not allocating any funding. And actually, I run an RFA this last session to do a program with mosquito abatement and the Department of Corrections, which is working great. But, we barely invested $50,000. So yes, the answer is we need to do more to have a shared responsibility on areas where you have special districts. Inland Port, the Fur Park now is a special district as well. And hello, the state prison, which, by the way, we should not build a state prison on top of water. I mean, what do you think is going to happen when you put humans so yeah, mosquito abatement is a crisis. If you want to go to the state prison and see what the mosquito crisis is, spend an hour there because it's eating everyone. So I don't know that we can simplify by saying is the inland port growth. It's not. It is part of everything else. So I will defend the stand of the Mosquito Abatement Board to actually increase, and we're trying to find other places. I mean, we are looking into finding other ways, but it should be shared responsibility. And I will look into the bill. I've been looking into ways of paying I made an appropriation request of $1 million for the state prison on mosquito abatement before. So, I mean, please know that there has been, a whole increase in trying to get us there, and there should be more. And I'm actually, right now I have one open to look into how we address that. And I'm saying that with full disclosure that I'm in the board of the mosquito abatement, which just started barely this year. So full disclosure there.
Okay, Representative Melissa Garf Ballard, I'm kind of curious, given your involvement in corrections and the appropriations committee for that. Not to mention, I would, if I was incarcerated out there and they weren't doing anything about the mosquitoes eating me, I'd be calling a lawyer. So, Representative Garf Ballard.
I'm not an expert on all the mosquito abatement, but I think much of what is being discussed in her question does have to do with a lot with air quality. So I'm just going to take that aspect of it and the inland port for just a moment. So our population, as it has exponentially continued to grow and increase, ironically, our air quality has maintained the same level, meaning we're actually doing a lot more with more people. We're not making it worse. In fact, we're making a lot of it better. So right now there's a lawsuit that Utah has against the federal EPA because they say we're not only exceeding our non-attainment zone, but we are extremely high over our air quality zoning. Well, 80% of that is because of other states' air coming into our state. So only 20% of that is us. I want to address two things. One of them is the Inland Port Authority. One of their major roles and responsibilities is to help to get more trucks off the road, because we have 60 to 70% of the nation's GDP travels through Utah. Doesn't mean they stop here, but they travel through. And so one of the major goals and roles is to actually get 25% of those trucks onto rail to improve the airshed right directly on I-15. And another thing that you'll see from me this legislative session is actually a resolution to Congress, really asking them to put pressure to change how long it takes to get permitting approved. So whether it is for drilling or power plants, but I'm going to talk about reforestation. Utah wants to be responsible for reforesting our natural areas because our conifers, our pine trees, take so much of the water because it doesn't go into the ground, and old trees are fire hazards. And so you look at what's going on in California right now. We are more responsible. I know of a company, 106 Reforestation, that actually had $1 million from the state of Utah to help reforest a lot of our national forest area, but they're waiting on getting permits. So they actually gave that money back. They're like, we can't do anything. We don't know how long it's going to be. So my resolution for reducing the amount of time it takes to get permitting is really important for Utah to have stewardship and take responsibility over our lands in whatever form. And of course, we're in lawsuits against because the federal government has 70% of our land is in their hands. We don't want to turn around and be given that and then sell it off for private entity. We want our conversation even today with the majority caucus is to keep those private lands, but we want to take care of them because the federal government is not, and they're not allowing the permitting for us to do reforestation. So I think when the question of air quality, it's a really big deal for both the Democrats and the Republicans. We look at it sometimes through different lens, but the good news is only 20% of that non-attainment was actually from us, but we want to do more. We need to have the federal government allow us to do more. And let's let the inland port continue to get trucks off the road, get 25% of the trucks off the road. They have been successful, which much of that, and it's not a designated place. It's not just the Northwest quadrant. They've been expanding multiple areas so that the trucks don't have to come through Salt Lake, that they can stop in southern Utah or in northern Utah and not have to come right through our Wasatch Front for the air quality that really gets stuck between the two mountains.
I think
Representative Romero.
I think when it comes to the federal, when it comes to public lands, You know, these lands belong to my family and other people for 12,000 years, and we didn't say this is our land, this is your land. We were part of, you know, we respected the land, and so this ownership of land and the conversation of land is problematic for me personally, because some of these areas we've seen people and even someone who served with us disrespect those lands by driving an RV through those lands that are sacred. We look at Mount Rushmore, and those were sacred. The Black Hills were sacred to the indigenous communities, and they were supposed to be protected by treaties. So when we're talking about public lands and quote unquote Utah's public lands, it's a much more larger conversation, because we have to involve our sovereign nations. When it comes to air quality, still the biggest pollutant here, because we're in a bowl, are emissions from cars. Pretty soon it's going to be emissions from buildings. And we have to talk about ozone too. We're not talking about the ozone, and that's why we're talking about the EPA and stuff. And yeah, there's stuff coming from other states because of wildfires and stuff like that. But we also have to think about how do we contribute to that as well. So and we have to look at what are our different energy sources, and why have we as the state legislature been so resistant to clean energy, especially when we're talking about renewable energy. And I know someone asked a question about transmission lines. We've been discussing as long as I've been on the Public Utilities Committee, how we're going to generate power, because as a state we're growing, and our lines that we currently have can't carry that power. So it's not just even about the energy resources we have, it's about how we're going to transmit that, and how we're going to build and ensure that we're building correctly, because especially when you look at Salt Lake City and our infrastructure, it's very old. How are we going to be able to maintain all the people moving here to Utah? And how are we going to be able to ensure that the energy we use isn't hurting other populations? And so I think that we've done, as the good representative might agree with me on this, but there is so much more we could have done with solar when we're talking about renewables, but we've been so resistant. The way we treated net metering, the way we've battled just even having the conversations about renewables and diversifying our energy portfolio. Am I saying we're just going to get rid of traditional energy right away? No. But if we don't do something about our transmission lines and we continue to grow, we're going to face a big problem.
Yeah. Representative Ward, do you want to answer any of that, or should we move on to
No,
affordable
I think, I mean, to the specific question about power lines from Delta to Mona,
Yes, let's talk about that question though, because so everyone knows the question, and I'm just pulling it up here really quick. Governor Cox, is this the one about the Northern Corridor through the Red Cliffs?
No.
Okay, hold on. We're not on the radio anymore, so I don't have to be perfect. It is in the open question, and if you have it right there, you can go ahead and talk about it.
Sure. The question just says, will the legislature address the infrastructure issue of getting transmission lines from Delta to Mona?
Mm-hmm.
In the past, I mean, so we had a very, very large power plant, IPP, there in Delta. I think it's 1,200 megawatt. That's a big power plant. But we have not had transmission lines to bring it to Utah because that plant did not supply energy to Utah mostly. That 95% of that energy went straight down to California. That's not surprising. California contracted with the IPA authority here in Utah to build that plant for that purpose, and it goes to the city of Los Angeles and other cities who contracted and paid to build that plant. But the cities in Utah retain the ability to get a small amount of power from that. That comes to them if they wish it. It's kind of like a backup supply of power. That has been an argument in the legislature now for the last 3 or 4 years, because California is no longer willing to use coal as energy. And so that group had made a plan to retire those coal plants and switch over to new natural gas plant. And it has been a fight for 4 years in a row, and there's still going to be a little bit of fighting left to do this session. But the new power plant is coming online this spring, this summer, which is great. It's made it through so many hurdles, and by this summer it will be up and running. But it's a smaller plant, 800 megawatts instead of 1,200. But having that new, and I don't know what will happen with the coal plants. There is still efforts to keep at least one of the coal plants open, and then to try and figure out where that energy would even go, because there's not. I mean, some of that energy could go between Delta and Mona, but not the whole plant worth. But once that new plant's up, that will be an energy hub that might be a place where a lot of other energy could be generated and go somewhere, including to Utah if we had bigger transmission lines between Delta and Mona. But getting the new plant up will be a huge step and running towards making that a possibility in the future. And, some large utility, be it UAMPS or be it Rocky Mountain Power, will have to want that power. And if they want that power out to consumers somewhere else, then there will need to be a plan for those transmission lines. But we'll be a lot closer after this year is passed with the new plant up and running. And that could be geothermal, right? The geothermal plants that we have would need to go through a place like that to get out to consumers, as would a lot of solar down there. So I'm looking forward to getting that plant online after fighting about it for 4 years in a row.
Yeah. There's a lot of geothermal, as I recall, that was at the old prison site. I hope they're taking that into consideration as they build out that new city, so to speak, Representative Ward.
Geothermal is still, I don't want to say experimental, but it's getting closer. It's not ready for prime time because at least so far it's still more expensive than the other forms, right? But it doesn't produce CO2, so it would be another very important source if we could make it just cost a little bit less. And the technology that makes geothermal work is fracking, right? Fracking is what makes you be able to get more of the heat out when you do geothermal energy production. And the largest geothermal plant in the country is right here in Utah. Again, we were not willing to pay for that investment when it was more expensive. California was willing to pay for that. So the plant is here, the experiment is here, but right now it's California who's willing to purchase that power. But I wish them all the best, because if that works better and the cost comes down a little, that would be another base load source of power that we could benefit from, and that'd be a big help in reducing CO2 emissions.
All right. We have about 20 minutes left in our stated Zoom session. We're going to end at 7:30, and there's 2 topics I want to get to with some questions from the Zoom attendees. First, I want to talk, though, housing affordability, affordable housing, like you were saying, Representative Ward, and also its connection to our homelessness crisis. We'll start with you, Ray.
Oh, yeah. So the homelessness crisis has gotten worse in direct proportion to housing being more expensive. We do a point in time count, and that's important because it gives us some data, and that's how we're even able to say on here that we know it's gone up by, X number of percent. But you can think of how expensive housing is as pressure pushing people out of their house. Each individual follows some individual pathway of bad luck and bad choices, and just something, a catastrophe that goes wrong for them. But overall, if housing's more expensive and a landlord's cutting somebody a break, and the landlord has their expenses and they know that they could be making $500 a month more if they got a different tenant, they're going to kick more people out than they would if there was only a $150 difference in what they could get. So when housing costs are high, it directly creates homelessness, and it will permanently. If housing costs stay high, there will be permanent increased pressure pushing people out of their homes into homelessness. That's just, in my mind, that's just an axiom that I accept as true. So to get housing costs down by allowing for more homes and allowing for smaller homes and allowing homes on smaller lots where you don't have to pay for so much land, in the long run, to me, will do more for homelessness than each individual project one at a time. That's long enough. We can't just let people languish the whole time. But a longer term solution, to me, involves making it so that smaller bits of housing, so that it's not that your only choice is a 1/4 acre lot, that you could get on something that was 1/10 of an acre, that we allowed more quadplexes to be built or triplexes to be built. All those cost less. So there was a question in there about accessory dwelling units, and there was a bill passed from now 4 sessions ago that allowed for internal accessory dwelling units. So you're not even building another structure external to your home, but to say, hey, cities, and there's still 10 exceptions that had to be put in to get the bill through. If a person is renting out inside a part of their home, they're not building anything else external, then that's not zoning. That's just them using their own space, and you need to allow them to do that. Well, if I had my way, external accessory dwelling units would also be allowed. And on here, the question that was asked said, does it make a difference? And I would say yes, capital letters. Every single accessory dwelling unit that gets built makes a difference to the person who gets to live in it, who wouldn't have had a place to live if you hadn't have built that. And every single one that gets built benefits the person who built it. Yeah, they're charging some rent, or maybe they're giving somebody a break on rent because that person helped shovel their snow and do their groceries because they can't drive anymore. But it benefits every single one, benefits the individuals there.
But Representative Ward, and we're going to get everyone else in on this, these are local issues. This would be the state laying a blanket across the state to municipalities and counties. And typically they don't like that. So
Yes, that
how
is
as a
correct.
matter of policy, how do you execute that as a lawmaker, state lawmaker?
So to me, it's long past time for the state to do something about it. Cities right now are not incentivized. So we can sit and talk in rooms about, well, I mean, what Governor Cox has said, and I wish him well, but to me, what he's saying doesn't make any sense. There's a goal of 35,000 homes or whatever. Setting
Yeah, how do we
goals.
do that? He's not building them.
No, the state does not build housing. Cities do not build housing either. Who
Mhm.
builds housing is developers. And we could start by allowing for what cities do is stop housing from being built. Cities make plans for infrastructure, and we need plans for infrastructure. So we have to have plans for infrastructure, but there is almost no place in the whole state. In any city that just says, hey, tenth of an acre lots are just allowed here as a permitted use. Almost
Mhm.
nowhere. Now there'll be individual projects where they say, no, look, we allowed this. These 3 acres were tenth of an acre lots, but almost all of those were part of development agreements where in exchange for being allowed to build those tenth of an acre lots, the builder made the roads over here wider than normal, and the builder gave up some of their land to put a park in over here, and the builder made an HOA to charge the people locally to do the maintenance of the park that they put in there, and every single one of the other things that the builder was forced to agree to before they were allowed to build increase the cost of the homes and the things in that area. To me, we just need to make it is statewide. It is the state saying these things need to be allowed if we're ever going to have enough homes that our kids and grandkids can still live here when they start their families and wish to become owners of property.
Senator Escamilla, then Representative Romero, then Representative Garth Ballard, housing and homelessness.
Thank you. I think I appreciate Representative Ward's perspective. I agree with everything he said. He's right on in the issue of cities and municipalities. Um, it's true that we want to obviously empower local governments, but they are part of the state. And when we don't see anything moving, Economic Opportunity Commission started engaging with those cities and municipalities to say, look, I mean, this is part of what we see the future of the state. We cannot grow and have the economic growth that we want to see if we don't have place for people to live. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So it doesn't add up. And if you guys are not going to do it on your own, then we're going to have to put some framework. And I think I agree on that. Now, here's the key. And Laura, I think the challenge right now with an economic, with the economic downturn and not, I mean, as we're now coming back, which is part of the cycles of our economies, we need to recognize that people have different faces. And when we talk about homelessness, there are people that are experiencing homelessness in different ways. Not everyone is going to be in the same group of people. So we need to recognize the group that will always need help. There's people that have some severe mental, behavioral, cognitive issues, and we're going to need a very robust case management, lower some of the ways of entry to getting access to housing, and then it may look different in the housing way to get there. And then you have some families, because many families are one paycheck away from homelessness. It's just an economic situation. And those are the ones that are staying with other family members in couches or one little room, or in cars, living in cars with their children. And those need an immediate response to get them into some type of transitional housing as they get prepped to whatever they need, whether it's waiting to get a job or to actually qualify for whatever. They need transitional housing. And if it looks like in a transitional housing, like a shelter, like you would do for a DV, domestic violence case, let it be. I spent a day on Tuesday in Phoenix in some incredible organizations that are doing this in the Phoenix metro area. And they are having families that literally one of them lost their job. They can't afford the rent. They're homeless with their 5 kids. Transitional housing immediately, no barriers coming in. Get them so they couldn't find a job. Because the moment you end up with no address, no place to, I mean, how do you stabilize something like that? So that's another group of people. We can do that. That should not be that hard. you know, the ones that need very severe, like acute case management, the ones that are just a paycheck situation, transitional housing, let's get them into that. And then we get into what Representative Ward said, and this organization, incredible work because they have their own mortgage company, but their mortgage company, because they're a nonprofit in this situation, their entire job is to actually case manage these families to actually get access to all the different places where there is some support, financial services. And not everyone is going to be under the 200% of poverty level or the index, you know, medium income index. I mean, so many other ways that you can assist, but other mortgage, you know, services that are more for profit, they don't have the time. I mean, they're like, why would I, if you're ready to buy a home, let's just get you into the house. But we need to do more to help people get the tools so they can actually access some of the programs and services. And we need to just more affordability, period, for everyone, just because it is cost prohibitive. I could not purchase my house now, Laura. I mean,
Yeah,
where
me neither.
I'm in Salt Lake City, I mean the West, I'm in Rose Park. I can't afford my house now. So I'm staying here. I mean, like, you know, this is the most valuable thing we have because I could not, you know, get out of my house and purchase my house. So I think that is telling that it doesn't matter. These are families and professionals and they're working and they probably have never been enrolling to a program that was getting benefits. They're still struggling and you're a paycheck away from that. So I think it's going to look with many different resources and tools that we need to put in the toolbox.
Representative Romero and Garth Ballard also maybe pull into this in your response, the Airbnb situation, because, you know, I put in a rental unit. Do I want someone I'm going to have to deal with all the time, or do I want transient traffic, which is going to make me more money too? Representative Romero.
Well, maybe Representative Ballard could address that. My concern also is people who rent and how, like, if you're late, like one day on your rent, you get this outrageous fee, and then the next thing you know, you're getting sent to the attorney, and then you're looking at more money. I co-signed for my son's lease a long time ago, and I'm still on it. And I'm like, hey, how am I still on this lease? And I mean, he always pays his rent because I make sure it's paid at times. But I see the warnings that come saying, if you're late on your rent, just know that's going to get sent to the attorney right away. And I'm like, what the hell is this? You know, and so, like, how are we making it so hard for young people like him who are in their 20s just to live, and just thinking about those working families that are working really hard, but they're not making a lot of money and they're late on their rent. And the next thing you know, they're being pushed out of their apartment, and then they owe thousands of dollars. And then how are they going to get into another apartment? So that's one population of people. But then we also have to think about the people who are experiencing homelessness, as the good representative senator pointed out. There are many reasons why people are experiencing homelessness. So we can't deal with people the same way. We can't use a one-fit-all model on how we deal with individuals, but we also have to invest in services and make sure that people have the proper training and best practices when they're working with people experiencing homelessness, whether it's mental illness, whether it's drug addiction, because there are some organizations out there that are operating that I have huge concerns with, but supposedly they're helping people who are experiencing homelessness. But I have some huge concerns because I had personal experiences with one of my family members, and then them using my family member as their poster child and still doing it, and then letting everyone know that was my family member, and sharing my family's business out there. And that really bothered me, and that is unethical. So I think when it comes to homelessness too in Salt Lake City, the city can't do it alone because most people experiencing homelessness are not all from the city. And so the state has to take some ownership there, but we can't do that by threatening the mayor of Salt Lake City because they're not of our political party or they don't do things the way we do things. And so I think when we talk about the federal government all the time here at the state level, we also have to look at ourselves, and we have to look in that mirror and go, hey, maybe we're doing the same thing that we don't like the feds doing to us that we're doing to Salt Lake City because of who runs the city and who represents the city. And that's where I'll say partisan politics, I feel, plays a role. And we guise it as we're dealing with immigration issues, or Salt Lake City can't get their act together when it comes to homelessness. And so I just wanted to put that out there too. And I'll defer the rest of the time to the good Representative Ballard.
There we go.
Since we're talking about policy, I'm going to be pretty specific and direct about policy regarding this because it's very emotional, as you can tell, with issues with this. So first thing, Airbnb. that is a local issue of what their zoning is, which is why the money that the legislature did put into new construction had a lot to do with first-time home buyers, because it's really easy to just have construction or have facilities or have Airbnb, because I'm looking at the cost of rent is what our mortgage payment used to be. We want ownership instead of just rental wherever possible, and to help people get that. And so also for policy, the legislature for 2 years in a row really worked on directing our counties and cities to have a code blue policy and also a homeless facility. Some of them needing to be 24/7 all year, and some of them just during the winter months. And so we've tried to help really direct with money that's available for those counties to help have a safe place during the cold times. I fed the homeless in Salt Lake actually on Christmas Day, and as I was looking around, it was not the family facility, so it was a lot of individuals, and you could see there was a lot of mental health issues. And so one thing I want to give some hope to, and that is what you'll see this year that probably will never be in the newspaper, but is a policy change. And that is taking some of our Medicaid money and putting it for corrections for those who are incarcerated, to actually have a system for, just like you and I have in the public and private sector, of, it's called Epic. It's where you can go to a secure site to message your doctor, have a video conference with your doctor. Right now, if you are in jail or incarcerated, none of your medical records are transferred. If they help you while you're under their roof and they get you stable, they get you medications, and you have to get a new doctor who re-diagnoses, who re-prescribes, and then they let them out into the community. There's, again, the records are so secure that it doesn't go to anybody. So they start all over again, and no wonder they end up in the street with the mental and emotional challenges again. So Representative Ulyson is actually taking some of this Medicaid money to develop an Epic system for those who are incarcerated, which means when they cut, and we're wanting to align this with the jails, with the prison is the first step, the jails is the second. That means when they come in, immediately they should be able to say, I'm on this blood pressure medication, here's my doctor, they can send it in, and there's not the need to re-diagnose or wait for 2 months to see a doctor to re-diagnose. So if you're on a medication, we hope to be able to keep you on that medication. And also your time while you're incarcerated. Senator Escamilla opened up legislation that 90 days before reentering, that we can help them apply for Medicaid. That's a really big deal. So the ability to not just be registered for Medicaid before they leave, but I'm working with the reentry division for them to have an appointment with their new doctor before they leave corrections, that they know at what date. Not only do they get 30 days of a prescription with them when they leave, but they know who their doctor is at the location that they are going back to, and what day they have that follow-up to get that re-prescribed. I hope that with this change, that as they're going from a jail to prison or wherever it may be, that we're not restarting the medical process all over again, but we have this continuity of care that is, in my mind, one of the most important parts when you talk about prevention of homelessness and prevention of that challenge. I hope that these things will change, because we also are helping them to have jobs and education and certification while they're incarcerated, and we now are required to help them apply for jobs before they leave. So this alignment is really important. There's so much prevention that everyone's trying and working to do. It is emotional and it's taxing for those who are in the circumstance, and also the communities who are trying to receive them and help them. So there's a lot of people, we'll all keep working on it, but looking at the policy is really where the rubber meets the road of what government can try to do to help mitigate these issues.
Well, thank you, everyone. We are out of time and didn't even get to the Great Salt Lake, which would probably take another half hour. But I do want to give each of you about 30 seconds for a closing thought. Representative Garth Ballard, why don't you go ahead?
I really appreciate the opportunity to be a legislator. I get a lot of ideas from many of my constituents reaching out saying, did you know this was an issue? So I appreciate that. I appreciate voters. That's how your voice is being heard. And this year, my focus is really on how to make that incarceration to prevent them from coming back. So that we need them to take jobs, we need them to be contributing. But I think overall, there's a lot of people that want to do good, and we just have to vet the policies of what we can afford and what are the good things moving forward. So thank you to you for inviting me to be on, and to our listeners and to our constituents for being involved and wanting to be part of the solutions.
Thank you. Senator Escamilla.
Thank you. And just shout out to obviously you, Laura, for this incredible work and radio. The media is so important and our constituents are so critical. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. It's and the American Association of University of Women Legislative Preview. Every year, just out there making sure people know how to engage. We do make a big decisions. We also balance a budget of $29.4 billion on how we spend your taxpayers' money. So I encourage everyone to check and spend time. Every legislator in the Utah State Legislature participates of an appropriations subcommittee, and we have them open to the public. It's a very transparent process of those appropriations committees, and they're very, you get to learn a lot, and we spend a lot of time on those. So I encourage people to participate. That's our number one responsibility, is to balance the budget. We never leave the Capitol without a balanced budget, which is critical. And then we will review probably 1,600 bills. We did 1,574 last session, and we passed 591. So, those are our averages, 1,500 to 1,600 bills and about 600 bills that we pass. It's a lot of work in 45 days. So we
Yes.
need the public to engage. We need your voice, and we want to hear from you. And we will definitely be there, standing up. And for the many that feel that are voiceless because of the lack of representation, or because they don't have the funds, or they don't have a lobbyist representing their interest, please connect to your legislators. You have every right to do that, and we're there for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Escamilla. Representative Romero.
I'll ditto what Senator Escamilla did on thanking everyone, so I don't have to say the same thing again. But I want to thank my colleagues, Representative Ballard and Representative Ward, for being here with us. They've always been open to honest, open conversations. And I think that's critical when we're here to represent all voices in the state of Utah. More importantly for me, I don't want to forget about survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence and interpersonal violence. And I mean, we're like, what, on day 9 or something, and we've already had 2 women that were murdered by their ex that they were trying to leave in the situation. And so I want to make sure that we look at that, because 1 in 3 women will be a victim of either sexual assault or domestic violence, intimate partner violence. And so that's something we still need to continue to focus on and make sure that we're providing those funding and that service, but also more, what are we doing to do the preventative piece so people aren't getting incarcerated and people are able to to have those healthy boundaries and to have that structure in place, so that as they move along in their careers and what they do, there's not abuse. So I guess I just really, sometimes we forget about those survivors, and we forget about the impact of the violence on them and the generational cycles we see when it comes to violence. And so we need to be better as a state in addressing that.
Thank you, Representative Romero. Representative Ward, you get the final say here among your colleagues.
I do also want to thank my colleagues for being on the meeting here. I guess my priorities for funding in the state, I don't have any new programs at all whatsoever that I have as any sort of priority. My focus is on programs that the state is already running, but hasn't funded enough to keep them going, just so that they have enough to keep going. Things like Baby Watch, and so that our child support services work for people, and so that home health will work for people, and our services for seniors. I guess that's my budget area of focus. But thanks to the league for hosting this particular meeting, and even more just for your indefatigable work. Just over time, you're always there. You're always putting together events like this, just to make people more aware of the process that's going on, with your special focus on voting and getting people to vote and to care about the process. You're the little bit of glue that just holds us all together. That we need to have these values in common to continue to be the country and the state and the community that we want to be. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Representative Ward, and all of our lawmakers. Our mics and our Zooms are open to you for, well, year round, but especially during the legislative session starting January 21st. I want to go back to the Utah of the Year and President of the League of Women Voters of Utah, Catherine Bealey, to wrap us up.
Thank you, Laura. I can't thank you enough for moderating, and thank all of our panelists for participating. I think this shows the public that our legislators are people too. We want you to engage with your legislators. We want you to engage with state politics. It's not a frightening thing. Once you get used to it, it's just like talking to your neighbors.
That's what it should be, right?
Yes. Thank you so much for coming. We hope you will all continue to be involved. If you want to know more about the league, go to lwvutah.org or aauwutah.org for the AAUW folks. Thank you again so much, and thanks, Laura. See you all up at the Capitol.
The People's House. Good night, everybody.